The first contraction felt less like a wave of pain and more like the whole world squeezing me in its fist. It was a deep, primal clenching that stole my breath and made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. At the exact same moment, a different kind of wave, a filthy brown one, slammed against our front door with the force of a battering ram. The sound, a sickening, splintering crunch, was the sound of our life being torn apart. One wave was coming from inside me, a promise of new life. The other was coming from outside, a threat of absolute destruction. And I was trapped 38 weeks pregnant right in the middle of both. My husband, Mark, was stuffing towels under the door, a futile gesture against the growing dark stains spreading across our hardwood floors. His back was to me, his shoulders tense. He didn't see me clutch my stomach and double over the kitchen island, my knuckles white against the cool granite. "Mark," I gasped, the word barely a whisper. He turned, his face a mask of frantic concentration. "I think it's holding, for now." Then he saw my expression. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and ghostly in the flickering glow of our emergency lantern. "The power had gone out an hour ago." "What is it, Sarah? Is it the baby?" I could only nod, a fresh contraction already building, a slow-burning fire in my lower back. I looked from his terrified eyes to the water now bubbling up through the floorboards around his boots. The birth plan we had so meticulously laminated, the one with the soothing playlist and breathing techniques, was in my hospital bag upstairs. It might as well have been on the moon. There was no hospital. There was no soothing playlist. There was only the storm, the rising water, and a baby who had decided, against all logic and reason, that now was the perfect time to be born. It's funny how quickly your perception of a storm can change. Just 12 hours earlier, Hurricane Isolde had been a news report, a swirling, colorful graphic on a screen. We were in New Orleans, a city that knows the language of hurricanes better than any other. We'd done everything right, or so we thought. We'd boarded up the windows of our small home in the Broadmoor neighborhood. We had batteries, canned food, and enough bottled water to last a week. The levees were supposed to hold. They always said the new system was stronger, better, foolproof. Our house was elevated, built after the last big one, a fortress against the water. We felt prepared, almost smug in our safety. Mark had spent the afternoon putting the finishing touches on the nursery. He'd hung a mobile of little hand-painted wooden stars above the crib, his brow furrowed in concentration as he made sure it was perfectly level. I sat in the rocking chair, my hands resting on the magnificent swell of my belly, feeling our daughter kick and roll. We'd decided on the name Hope. It felt right. "See that, Hope?" I'd murmured to my stomach. "Your dad is making everything perfect for you." We were blissfully, foolishly unaware that the world we were preparing for her was about to be washed away. The rain started in the late afternoon, a gentle tapping that grew into a steady, drumming roar by nightfall. The wind began to moan, then howl, a living thing clawing at the walls of our house. The lights flickered once, twice, and then surrendered, plunging us into a profound, inky blackness broken only by the strobing flashes of lightning. It was unsettling but not yet terrifying. We lit candles, ate cold chili straight from the can, and told ourselves it would pass. We were safe. We were together. The first sign that we were wrong came around midnight. It was a sound we couldn't place at first, a low, gurgling rumble from the street. Mark peered through a crack in the boarded-up windows. "The street drains can't keep up," he said, his voice tight. "The water's already over the curb." An hour later, it was sloshing against the front steps. 2 hours later, it was lapping at the front door. We learned the terrible truth from a battery-powered radio. A levee to the east hadn't just been breached, it had collapsed entirely. A wall of water was surging through the city, swallowing entire neighborhoods. Broadmoor was directly in its path. That's when the real fear began to set in. It was a cold, creeping thing that started in the pit of my stomach. Mark tried his cell phone. No service. He tried the landline. A dead, hollow silence. We were cut off. The city's emergency services would be completely overwhelmed. No one was coming for us. And then the first contraction. Now trapped in the dim, humid glow of the lantern, the reality of our situation crashed down on me with more force than the water against our door. The lower level of our home was lost. The water was rising with an unnatural speed, a murky, swirling tide carrying with it the debris of our neighbors' lives. I saw a child's plastic tricycle float past the window, followed by a trash can, then a lawn chair. "We have to go upstairs," Mark said, his voice shaking but firm. He grabbed the emergency bag in my hospital bag, his movements jerky and panicked. "Come on, Sarah." Slowly. Slowly wasn't an option. Another contraction seized me, sharper and more insistent than the last. It felt like my hips were being pulled apart. I cried out, leaning against the wall as Mark tried to guide me toward the stairs. The water was ankle-deep now, shockingly cold and foul-smelling. I could feel the current tugging at my legs. With every step I took, the pain inside me intensified, a brutal rhythm set against the chaos of the storm. Climbing the stairs was the most difficult thing I had ever done. Each step was a mountain. Halfway up, I had to stop, gripping the railing as a powerful contraction held me hostage. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the breathing exercises from our birthing class. Breathe in the calm, breathe out the tension. But there was no calm. There was only the sound of the wind, the groaning of the house's foundation, and the horrifying noise of our belongings being smashed against the walls downstairs. I could hear the refrigerator topple over with a heavy, final crash. When I opened my eyes, I saw what the water was carrying. Our wedding album, its white leather cover now a muddy brown, floated past the bottom of the staircase before being sucked into the dark recesses of the living room. The little blue booties I had bought for Hope bobbed on the surface for a moment before disappearing. Everything we had built together, every memory we had enshrined within these walls, was being consumed. We made it to the master bedroom, the highest and driest point in the house. Mark immediately began barricading the door with a heavy dresser, though we both knew it was a temporary, desperate measure. I collapsed onto the bed, drenched in sweat, my body trembling uncontrollably from exertion and fear. "I have to time them," I managed to say between ragged breaths. Mark fumbled for his phone, its screen the only source of light besides the lantern. He clicked on the stopwatch feature, his hand shaking. "Okay," he said, trying to sound reassuring, but his voice was thin, stretched taut with terror. "Hey Sarah. We can do this. You can do this." But as I looked at him, my strong, capable husband, the man who could fix anything, I saw the raw fear in his eyes. He knew just as I did that we were completely out of our depth. He was a software engineer, not a doctor. I was a graphic designer, not a pioneer woman accustomed to giving birth in a barn. We were two modern people suddenly thrown into a primitive life-or-death struggle. The contractions were coming faster now, every 7 minutes. They were no longer a background ache. They were all-consuming tidal waves of agony that blotted out everything else. During the brief respites between them, the horror of our surroundings would rush back in. We could hear the water rising up the stairs, a steady, relentless sloshing sound. It was coming for us. It was no longer a question of if it would reach our bedroom, but when. "Mark," I sobbed, clutching his hand as another contraction began to build. "The baby, what if something's wrong? What if she's stuck? I can't do this here. I can't." He knelt beside the bed, his face close to mine. He wiped the tears and sweat from my face with his thumb. "Listen to me, Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You are the strongest person I know. You are strong enough to do this. We're going to meet our daughter. We are going to hold her in our arms. Do you hear me? The world can fall apart outside, but in this room it's just us. You, me, and her. Nothing else matters." His words were a lifeline, something to cling to in the swirling vortex of pain and fear. I tried to believe him. I tried to focus on his voice, on the feel of his hand in mine. But then a new sound cut through the storm, a sharp, percussive cracking from downstairs. It was the sound of the windows finally giving way, of the full, unrestrained force of Hurricane Isolde pouring into our home. The floor beneath us shuddered, and at that exact moment I felt a sudden warm gush. My water had broken. The clock was no longer ticking. It had run out. The breaking of my water was not a gentle release. It was a definitive physical punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that read, "Your old life is over." The warmth that spread down my legs was instantly chased away by the icy chill of the floodwater that was now sloshing around my ankles. There was no turning back. There was no waiting for help. The baby was coming, and she was coming now. A new kind of contraction ripped through me, utterly different from the ones before. It was fierce, propulsive, a force of nature unto itself. It was no longer my body. It was a vessel for a power I couldn't comprehend, let alone control. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the roar of the wind and the crashing of water downstairs. Sarah. Mark's voice cut through the haze of pain. He was by my side in an instant, helping me onto the bed, our mattress now a lonely, quilted island in a rising sea of filth. Breathe with me, honey. Just like we practiced. Look at me. I tried to focus on his face, but his features swam before my eyes. The birthing classes felt like a scene from someone else's life. A calm, air-conditioned room where a smiling instructor told us to imagine our happy place. My happy place was this room, this house, this life that was currently being destroyed. The water pushed its way under our bedroom door, fanning out across the floor in dark, greedy fingers. The dresser Mark had wedged against it groaned and scraped as the pressure from the hallway mounted. With a sudden jolt, the door burst open and the water surged in, carrying with it a slick of mud and leaves. "Oh God," Mark whispered. He scrambled to move what he could onto the bed. The lantern, the remaining bottles of water, a stack of towels he'd found in the linen closet. Everything was happening so fast. The water level rose from an inch to half a foot in what felt like seconds. Our bed, once a sanctuary of comfort and sleep, was now a life raft. The contractions were a relentless storm inside my body, giving me no quarter. They were coming every 2 minutes, then every 90 seconds. I lost all track of time. My world shrank to the space between the beginning of a contraction and its end. In those brief valleys of relief, the terror would return. I'd see the water swirling around the legs of our bed, the dark shapes of things moving just beneath the surface. I'd feel the cold seeping into the mattress and I'd start to shiver uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. "You're getting cold," Mark said, his voice strained. He stripped off his own soaked t-shirt and draped our comforter over me, tucking it in tight. He was trying so hard to be the calm center of our universe, but I could see the frantic calculations working behind his eyes. He was trying to solve an impossible problem. "Okay," he said, forcing a tone of clinical detachment he absolutely did not feel. "The book said when the water breaks we need to try and stay clean. To prevent infection." He opened a bottle of precious drinking water and poured it over a towel. The absurdity of it was almost laughable. He was trying to create a sterile field in the middle of a literal sewer. But I loved him for it. I loved him for his desperate, hopeless attempt to impose order on the chaos. Then the next phase began. My body started to bear down, an involuntary, overwhelming urge to push. It was the most powerful physical sensation I had ever experienced, a biological imperative that took over every muscle and nerve. "Mark, I think it's time. I have to push." I sobbed, half in pain, half in pure, unadulterated terror. Mark's eyes went wide. He grabbed the birthing book he'd packed in the hospital bag, its pages now damp and warped. He frantically flipped through it with one hand, the other gripping mine. Okay, it says I need to check." He trailed off, looking at the murky water, then back at me. "Sarah, I can't. I don't know what I'm looking for." "There's no time." I screamed as my body coiled and clenched, pushing with a will of its own. "The baby is coming." He tossed the useless book aside. He leaned over me, his face inches from mine, his expression shifting from one of fear to one of fierce, unwavering resolve. "All right then. You and me, Sarah. We're going to do this. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. On the next one you push and I'll be right here." He became my anchor. The storm raged, the water rose, but Mark's voice was the only thing I could hear. He counted for me. He breathed with me. He told me I was a warrior. He told me our daughter was a fighter just like her mom. We worked for what felt like an eternity. Pushing, resting, breathing. The pain was blinding, a white-hot supernova that erased thought. The only thing that existed was the mission. Get this baby out. Get her out safely into this broken, flooded world. The lantern on the nightstand began to flicker. Its steady golden light, our only beacon in the darkness, faltered, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. No, not now," Mark muttered, his attention torn between the dying light and me. The water was higher now, licking at the edges of the mattress. The bed shifted as a particularly strong current, a pulse from the heart of the storm, flowed through the room. I could feel the cold wetness seeping into the mattress beneath my back. "I can't do it," I gasped, my strength failing me. I was exhausted, my body feeling like it had been torn in two. "I'm so tired." "Yes, you can, Sarah," Mark insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. I think I can see her. I can see her head. She has dark hair, Sarah. That single image, the picture of my daughter so close to being in my arms, ignited a reserve of strength I didn't know I possessed. It was a fire fueled by pure maternal instinct. "One more time," I said, my voice a raw whisper. "One more good push." I took a deep breath, grabbing Mark's arms, and bore down with every last ounce of my being. The lantern flickered one last time and died. We were plunged into absolute, complete darkness. The sound of the storm seemed to magnify, the groaning of the house more pronounced. The water felt colder. My scream was lost in the void. For a heartbeat, all hope felt lost. We were alone, in the dark, in the water, at the most critical moment of our lives. And then, over the howl of the wind, we heard it. It was a sound that did not belong. It wasn't the storm, and it wasn't the house breaking apart. It was a low, rhythmic thump thump thump, steady and mechanical. It grew louder, closer. It was the sound of a motor. For a second, Mark and I just stared into the oppressive darkness, frozen. The sound was real. A steady, mechanical heartbeat in the middle of the hurricane's fury. It was a sound that meant people, a world outside our drowning home. Hope, a feeling I thought had been extinguished, flared violently in my chest. "They can't see us," I gasped, the words punctuated by the building pressure in my body. The boards, the dark. Mark didn't need to be told. He scrambled off the bed, plunging into the thigh-deep, frigid water. He sloshed his way to the bedroom's side window, the one that faced the street, the one we hadn't had time to board up. With a guttural yell that was part frustration and part prayer, he drove his elbow into the glass. It shattered with a loud, ringing crash. "Help!" he roared into the storm, his voice raw. "My wife is in labor. Help us!" He screamed again and again, his voice cracking against the wind. The motor sound seemed to falter, to change its rhythm. A terrifying thought hit me. What if they were moving away? "Mark!" I cried out. I felt the baby descending, a final, unstoppable movement. There was no more waiting. Just as he opened his mouth to shout again, a beam of light, brilliant and sharp as a diamond, sliced through the darkness of our room. It swept across the ceiling, catching the swirling water and the terror on our faces before settling on us. Framed in the shattered window were the silhouettes of two men in a small, flat-bottomed fishing boat. "We see you," a voice called out, deep and calm, a Cajun accent thick as molasses. "Hang on now. We're comin' to you." Tears streamed down my face, mingling with the sweat and the rain. They were real. They were here. We weren't alone. That single beam of light was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was the sun and the moon and all the stars at once. One of the men, older, with a weathered face under a dripping baseball cap, held the light steady while the younger one maneuvered the boat as close to the window as he dared. "My wife. The baby's coming right now," Mark yelled, his voice breaking with relief. "We see, son," the older man said, his voice impossibly serene. He aimed the powerful flashlight directly at the foot of the bed. It illuminated the chaotic, sacred scene. "You just tell us what you need." In the steady, artificial daylight of that flashlight, I gave one final, monumental push. It was a release, a surrender, a soundless scream that poured all of my fear and pain and love into the world. And then there was a slithering, miraculous release. A cry. It wasn't a scream of pain or terror. It was a thin, furious, beautiful wail. The sound of life. The sound of my daughter. She was here. She was alive. In the middle of the flood, in the dark, she had arrived. Mark, guided by instinct and overwhelming love, caught her. He was sobbing, laughing, a mess of emotions as he gently cleared her mouth and nose. The rescuer in the boat had already passed a clean, dry towel through the window. Mark wrapped our daughter in it and laid her on my chest. She was so small, so perfect. Her skin was slick and her dark hair was matted to her tiny head, just as Mark had seen. I held her close, her cry turning into a soft gurgle against my skin. Her warmth spread through me, chasing away the cold, chasing away the fear. The storm still raged, but it couldn't touch us. In our small, illuminated bubble, all that existed was the miracle of our daughter. The rescue that followed was a blur of gentle hands and calm voices. The two men volunteers who had been running their boat up and down the flooded streets all night, helped Mark and me with our newborn daughter held securely against my chest, out of the window and into their boat. Leaving our home, our broken, drowned life felt strangely painless. It was just a thing. The only things that mattered were in my arms and sitting right beside me. The journey to the makeshift shelter at the convention center was surreal. We floated down streets I had driven 1,000 times, now transformed into dark, rushing canals. The tops of cars looked like sleeping metal beasts. The familiar street signs poked out of the water, marking a world that no longer existed. But above us, the storm was breaking. The relentless, punishing rain had softened to a drizzle, and in the east, the faintest line of gray was appearing on the horizon. A new day was coming. At the shelter, we were met with a flurry of activity, but it was a chaos of kindness. We were wrapped in warm, dry blankets. A volunteer medic who hadn't slept in 2 days checked over me and the baby, pronouncing us both exhausted but perfectly healthy. Someone handed Mark a cup of hot coffee and he held it with trembling hands, his face stained with tears and grime, looking more heroic to me than any man I had ever seen. I sat on a cot in a crowded, noisy hall, and I looked down at the tiny, sleeping face of our daughter. We had named her Hope before the storm, a sweet, simple name. But now that name had a weight, a power I could never have imagined. She was the hope we clung to in the darkness. She was the reason we fought. She was the proof that even when the floodwaters rise and wash everything away, life finds a way. Life begins again. Our home was gone. Our possessions were destroyed. The world we knew had been irrevocably changed. But as I held my daughter and watched my husband sleep from sheer exhaustion in a chair beside us, I knew we hadn't lost a thing. We had gained everything. We had been stripped down to the very foundation of our lives. Love, family, and the will to survive. And we had found that foundation to be unbreakable. That night, the storm took almost everything from us, but it gave us a gift in return: clarity. It taught me that strength isn't about having a perfect plan or being in control. It's about what you do when the plan is washed away and you're left with nothing but your own 2 hands and the beating of your own heart. It's about screaming for help into the darkness and trusting that someone will hear you. We all face floods in our lives. They might not be literal hurricanes, but they are the storms that threaten to overwhelm us. Loss, heartbreak, illness, despair. They rise up and make us feel like we're drowning, like we're trapped in the dark. But I am here to tell you that the light can find you even in the deepest water. That a stranger's kindness can be the boat that carries you to safety. And that even in the most profound darkness, new life, new hope, can be born. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced your own flood and found your way through it, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Your story of resilience could be the light someone else needs to see today. Please give this video a like if you believe in the power of hope, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories about the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.